The days did not pass swiftly at Bostel's Ford, and except in winter and during the spring sandstorms, the lagging time passed pleasantly. Lucy rode every day, sometimes with Van and sometimes alone. She was not over keen about riding with Van, first because he was in love with her, and secondly, in spite of that, she could not beat him when he rode the King. They were training Bostel's horses for the much-anticipated races. At last word arrived from the Utes and the Navajos that they accepted Bostel's invitation and would come in force, which meant, according to Holly and the other old riders, that the Indians would attend about 800 strong.
"That old Chief Hawk is coming," Holly informed Bostel. "He hasn't been here for several years. Recollect that bunch of colts he had? They're hosses, not mustangs, so you look out, Bostel."
No rider or rancher or sheepman, in fact, no one, ever lost a chance to warn Bostel. Some of it was in fun, but most of it was earnest. The nature of events was that sooner or later a horse would beat the King. Bostel knew that as well as anybody, though he would not admit it. Holly's hint made Bostel look worried. Most of Bostel's grey hairs might have been traced to his years of worry about horses. The day he received word from the Indians, he sent for Bracton, Williams, Munsey, and Creech to come to his house that night. These men with Bostel had for years formed in some way a club, which gave the Ford distinction. Creech was no longer a friend of Bostel's, but Bostel had always been fair-minded, and now he did not allow his animosities to influence him. Holly, the veteran rider, made the sixth member of the club. Bostel had a cedar log blazing cheerily in the white fireplace, for these early spring nights in the desert were cold. Bracton was the last guest to arrive. He shuffled in without answering the laconic greetings accorded him, and his usually mild eye seemed keen and hard.
"John, I reckon you won't love me for this here I've got to tell you tonight specially," he said seriously. "You old robber, I could love you anyhow," retorted Bostel, but his humor did not harmonize with the sudden gravity of his look. "What's up?" "Who do you suppose I just sold whiskey to?" "I've no idea," replied Bostel, yet he looked as if he was perfectly sure. "Courts and 4 of his outfit. 2 of them I didn't know. Bad men, judging from appearances, let alone company. The others was Hutchinson and Dick Sears." "Dick Sears!" exclaimed Bostel.
Munsey and Williams echoed Bostel. Holly appeared suddenly interested, and Creech alone showed no surprise.
"But Sears is dead," added Bostel. "He was dead, we thought," replied Bracton with a grim laugh. "But he's alive again. He told me he'd been in Idaho for 2 years in the gold fields. Said the work was too hard, so he'd come back here. Laughed when he said it, the little devil. I'll bet he was thinking of that wagon train of mine he stole."
Bostel gazed at his chief rider.
"Well, I reckon we didn't kill Sears after all," replied Holly. "I wasn't ever sure."
"Lord, Courts and Sears in camp!" ejaculated Bostel, and he began to pace the room.
"Oh, they're gone now," said Bracton.
"Take it easy, boss. Sit down," drawled Holly.
"The King is safe and all the racers. I swear to that. Why, Courts couldn't chop into that logging wire corral if he and his gang chopped all night. They hate work. Besides, Farland is there and the boys."
This reassured Bostel, and he resumed his chair, but his hand shook a little.
"Did Courts have anything to say?" he asked. "Sure, he was friendly and talkative," replied Bracton. "He came in just after dark. Left a man I didn't see out with the hosses. He bought 2 big packs of supplies and some leather stuff and, of course, ammunition. Then some whiskey. And plenty of gold and wouldn't take no change. Then while his men, 'cept Sears, was carrying out the stuff, he talked." "Go on, tell me," said Bostel. "While he'd been out north of Durango and fetched news. There's wild talk back there of a railroad going to be built some day joining east and west. was interesting, but no sense to it. How could they build a railroad through that country? North it ain't so cut up and lumpy as here, put in Holly. Grandest idea ever thought of for the West, avowed Bostel. If that railroad ever starts, we'll all get rich. Go on, Brack. Well, then Court said water and grass was petering out back on the trail, same as Red Wilson said last week. Finally he asked, how's my friend Bostel? I told him he was well. He looked kind of thoughtful then, and I knew what was coming. How's the king? Grand, I told him, grand. When is them races coming off? I said we hadn't planned the time yet, but it would be soon, inside a month or two. Bracton, he said sharp-like, is Bostel going to pull a gun on me on sight? Reckon he is, I told him. Well, I'm not powerful glad to know that. I hear Creech's blue hoss will raise the king this time. How about it? Sure and certain this year. I've Creech's and Bostel's word for that. Court's put his hand on my shoulder. You ought to have seen his eyes. I want to see that race. I'm going to. Well, I said you'll just have to stop being... You'll need to change your business. Then, Bostel, what do you think? Courts was sort of an eager and wild. He said that was a race he just couldn't miss. He swore he wouldn't turn a trick or let a man of his gang stir a hand till after that race, if he'd let him come.
A light flitted across Bostel's face.
I know how Courts feels, he said. Well, it's a queer deal, went on Bracton. For a long time you've meant to draw on Courts when you meet. We all know that. Yes, I'll kill him.
The light left Bostel's face. His voice sounded differently. His mouth opened, drooped strangely at the corners, then shut in a grim, tense line. Bostel had killed more than one man. The memory, no doubt, was haunting and ghastly.
Court seemed to think his word was guarantee of his good faith. He said he'd seen an Indian in here to find out if he could come to the races. I reckon, Bostel, that it wouldn't hurt none to let him come, and hold your gun hand for the time he swears he'll be honest. Queer deal, ain't it, men? A hoss thief turning honest just to see a race? Beats me. Bostel's a cheap way to get at least a little honesty from Courts, and refusing might rile him up bad. When all's said, Courts ain't as bad as he could be. I'll let him come, replied Bostel, breathing deep. But it'll be hard to see him, remembering how he's robbed me and what he's threatened. And I ain't letting him come to bribe a few weeks' decency from him. I'm doing it for only one reason, because I know he loves the king. How he wants to see the king run away from the field that day. That's why.
There was a moment of silence, during which all turned to Creech. He was a stalwart man, no longer young, with a lined face, deep-set, troubled eyes, and a white, thin beard.
Bostel, if Courts loves the king that well, he's in for heartbreak, said Creech with a ring in his voice.
Down crashed Bostel's heavy boots, and fire flamed in his gaze. The other men laughed, and Bracton interposed.
Hold on, you boy riders, he yelled. We ain't a-going to have any arguments like that. Now, Bostel, it's settled then. You let Courts come? Glad to have him, replied Bostel. Good, good. And now maybe we better get down to the business of this here meeting.
They seated themselves around the table, upon which Bostel laid an old and much-soiled ledger and a stub of lead pencil.
First we'll set the time, he said with animation, and then pitch in details. What's the date?
No one answered, and presently they all looked blankly from one to the other.
It's April, ain't it? Queried Holly.
That assurance was as close as they could get to the time of year.
Lucy,
called Bostel in a loud voice. She came running in, anxious, almost alarmed. Goodness, you made us jump. What on earth is the matter?
Lucy, we need to know the date, replied Bostel.
Date? Did you have to scare Auntie and me out of our wits just for that?
Who scared you? This is important, Lucy. What's the date?
"It's a week today since last Tuesday," answered Lucy sweetly.
"Huh, then it's Tuesday again," said Bostel, laboriously writing it down. "Now what's the date?"
"Don't you remember?"
"Remember? I never knew."
"Dad, last Tuesday was my birthday, the day you did not give me a horse."
"Ah, so it was," rejoined Bostel, confused at her reproach. "And that date was, let's see, April 6th. Then this is April 13th. Much obliged, Lucy. Run back to your aunt now. This hoss talk won't interest you."
Lucy tossed her head. "I bet I'll have to straighten out the whole thing." Then with a laugh she disappeared.
3 days beginning, say, June 1st. June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. How about that for the races?"
Everybody agreed, and Bostel laboriously wrote that down. Then they planned the details. Purses and prizes, largely donated by Bostel and Munsey, the rich members of the community, were recorded. The old rules were adhered to. Any rider or Indian could enter any horse in any race, or as many horses as he liked in as many races. But by winning one race he excluded himself from the others. Bostel argued for a certain weight in riders, but the others ruled out the suggestion. Special races were arranged for the Indians, with saddles, bridles, blankets, and guns as prizes. All of this appeared of absorbing interest to Bostel. He perspired freely. There was a gleam in his eye betraying excitement. When it came to arranging the details of the big race between the high-class racers, then he grew intense and harder to deal with. Many points had to go by vote. Munsey and Williams both had fleet horses to enter in this race. Holly had 1. Creech had 2. There were sure to be several Indians to enter fast mustangs, and Bostel had the king and 4 others to choose from. Bostel held out stubbornly for a long race. It was well known that Sage King was unbeatable in a long race. If there were any chance to beat him, it must be at short distance. The vote went against Bostel, much to his chagrin, and the great race was set down for 2 miles. But 2 miles, 2 miles, he kept repeating. "That's Blue Roan's distance. That's his distance, and it ain't fair to the king." His guests, excepting Creech, argued with him, explained, reasoned, and showed him that it was fair to all concerned. Bostel finally acquiesced, but he was not happy. The plain fact was that he was frightened. When the men were departing, Bostel called Creech back into the sitting-room. Creech appeared surprised, yet it was evident that he would have been glad to make friends with Bostel. "What'll you take for the roan?" Bostel asked tersely, as if he had never asked that before.
"Bostel, didn't we thresh that out before, and fell out over it?" queried Creech with a deprecating spread of his hands. "Well, we can fall in again if you'll sell or trade the hoss." "I'm sorry, but I can't." "You need money and hosses, don't you?" demanded Bostel brutally. He had no conscience in the matter of horse-dealing. "Lord knows I do," replied Creech. "Well, then, here's your chance. I'll give you 500 in gold and search of dawn to boot." Creech looked as if he had not heard aright. Bostel repeated the offer. "No," replied Creech. "I'll make it 1,000 and throw Plume in with Sarch," flashed Bostel. "No!" Creech turned pale and swallowed hard. 2,000 in Dusty Ben along with the others." This was an unheard-of price to pay for any horse. Creech saw that Bostel was desperate. It was an almost overpowering temptation. Evidently Creech resisted it by only applying all his mind to the thought of his clean-limbed, soft-eyed noble horse. Bostel did not give Creech time to speak. 2,500 and Two-Face along with the rest." "My God, Bostel, stop it! I can't part with Blue Roan. You're rich and you have no heart. That I always knew. At least to me you never had since I owned them 2 racers. Didn't I beg you a little back in time to lend me a few hundred to meet that debt? And you wouldn't unless I'd sell the hosses, and I had to lose my sheep. Now I'm a poor man, getting poorer all the time, but I won't sell or trade Blue Roan, not for all you've got."
Creech seemed to gain strength with his speech and passion with the strength. His eyes glinted at the hard, paling face of his rival. He raised a clenched fist.
"And by God, I'm going to win that race!"
During the week, Lucy had heard many things about Joel Creech, and some of them were disquieting. Some rider had not only found Joel's clothes on the trail, but he had recognized the track of the horse Lucy rode, and at once connected her with the singular discovery. Coupling that with Joel's appearance in the village encased in a heaving armor of adobe, the riders guessed pretty close to the truth. For them the joke was tremendous, and Joel Creech was exceedingly sensitive to ridicule. The riders made life unbearable for him. They had fun out of it for as long as Joel showed signs of taking the joke manfully, which was not long, and then his resentment won their contempt. That led to sarcasm on their part and bitter anger on his. It came to Lucy's ears that Joel began to act and talk strangely. She found out that the rider Van had knocked Joel down in Bracton's store and had kicked a gun out of his hand. Van laughed off the rumor, and Bracton gave her no satisfaction. Moreover, she heard no more rumors. The channels of gossip had suddenly closed to her. Bostel, when questioned by Lucy, swore in a way that amazed her, and all he told her was to leave Creech alone. Finally, when Munsey discharged Joel, who worked now and then, Lucy realized that something was wrong with Joel, and that she was to blame for it. She grew worried and anxious and sorry, but she held her peace, and determined to find out for herself what was wrong. Every day when she rode out into the sage she expected to meet him, or at least see him somewhere. Nevertheless, days went by and there was no sign of him. One afternoon she saw some Indians driving sheep down the river road towards the ford, and acting upon impulse, she turned her horse after them. Lucy seldom went down the river road. Riding down and up was merely work, and a horse has a little liking for it, as she had. Usually it was a hot, dusty trip, and the dark, great, overhanging walls had a depressing effect upon her. She always felt awe at the gloomy canyon and fear at the strange, murmuring Red River. But she started down this afternoon in the hope of meeting Joel. She had a hazy idea of telling him she was sorry for what she had done, and of asking him to forget it and pay no more heed to the riders. The sheep raised a dust cloud in the sandy wash where the road wound down, and Lucy hung back to let them get farther ahead. Gradually the tiny roar of pattering hoofs and the blended beating and baaing died away. The dust cloud, however, hung over the head of the ravine, and Lucy had to force Sarchedon through it. Sarchedon did not mind sand and dust, but he surely hated the smell of sheep. Lucy seldom put a spur to Sarchedon. Still she gave him a lash with her quirt, and then he went on obediently, if disgustedly. He carried his head like a horse that wondered why his mistress preferred to drive him down into an unpleasant hole, when she might have been cutting the sweet, cool sage wind up on the slope. The wash, with its sand and clay walls, dropped into a gulch, and there was an end of green growths. The road led down over solid rock. Gradually the rims of the gorge rose, shutting out the light in the cliffs. It was a winding road, and one not safe to tarry on in a stormy season. Lucy had seen boulders weighing a ton go booming down that gorge during one of the sudden fierce desert storms, when a torrent of water and mud and stone went plunging on to the river. The ride through here was short, though slow. Lucy always had time to adjust her faculties for the overpowering contrast these lower regions presented. Long before she reached the end of the gorge, she heard the sullen thunder of the river. The river was low, too, for otherwise there would have been a deafening roar. Presently she came out upon a lower branch of the canyon into a great red-walled space, with the river still 1,000 feet below, and the cliffs towering as high above her. The road led down along this rim, where to the left all was open, across to the split and peaked wall opposite. The river appeared to sweep round a bold, bulging corner a mile above. It was a wide, swift, muddy, turbulent stream. A great bar of sand stretched out from the shore. Beyond it, through the mouth of an intersecting canyon, could be seen a clump of cottonwoods and willows that marked the home of the Creeches. Lucy could not see the shore nearest her, as it was almost directly under her. Besides, in this narrow road, on a spirited horse, she was not inclined to watch the scenery. She hurried Sarchedon down and down, under the overhanging brows of rock, to where the rim sloped out and failed. Here was a half-acre of sand, with a few scant willows set down seemingly in a dent at the base of the giant beetling cliffs. The place was light, though the light seemed a kind of veiled red, and to Lucy always ghastly. She could not have been joyous with that river moaning before her, even if it had been up on level, and in the clear and open day. As a little girl 8 years old, she had conceived a terror and hatred of this huge, jagged rent, so full of red haze and purple smoke and the thunder of rushing waters, and she had never wholly outgrown it. The joy of the sun and wind, the rapture of the boundless open, the sweetness of the sage, these were not possible here. Something heavy and ponderous, heavy as those colossal cliffs, weighed down on her spirit. The voice of the river drove out any dream. Here was the incessant frowning presence of destructive forces of nature, and the ford was associated with catastrophe, to sheep, to horses, and to men. Lucy rowed across the bar to the shore where the Indians were loading the sheep into an immense rude flatboat. As the sheep were frightened, the loading was no easy task. Their bleating could be heard above the roar of the river. Bostel's boatmen, Shugru and Somers, stood knee-deep in the quicksand of the bar, and their efforts to keep free-footed were as strenuous as their handling of the sheep. Presently the flock was all crowded on board, the Indians followed, and then the boatmen slid the unwieldy craft off the sandbar. Then, each manning a clumsy oar, they pulled upstream. Along the shore were whirling slow eddies, and there rowing was possible. Out in that swift current it would have been folly to try and contend with it, let alone make progress. The method of crossing was to row up along the shore as far as a great cape of rock jutting out, and there make into the current, and while drifting down pull hard to reach the landing opposite. Heavy laden as the boat was, the chances were not wholly in favor of a successful crossing. Lucy watched the slow, laborious struggle of the boatmen with the heavy oars until she suddenly remembered the object of her visit to the ford. She appeared to be alone on her side of the river. At the landing opposite, however, were 2 men, and presently Lucy recognized Joel Creech and his father. A second glance showed Indians with burros evidently waiting for the boat. Joel Creech jumped into his skiff and shoved off. The elder man, judging by his motions, seemed to be trying to prevent his son from leaving the shore. But Joel began to row upstream, keeping close to the shore. Lucy watched him. No doubt he had seen her and was coming across. Either the prospect of meeting him or the idea of meeting him there in a place she was never herself made her want to turn and at once ride back home. But her stubborn sense of fairness overruled that. She would hold her ground solely in the hope of persuading Joel to be reasonable. She saw the big flatboat sweep into line of sight at the same time Joel turned into the current, but while the larger craft drifted slowly the other way, the smaller one came swiftly down and across. Joel swept out of the current into the eddy, rowed across that, and slid the skiff up on the sandbar. Then he stepped out. He was bareheaded and barefooted, but it was not that which made him seem a stranger to Lucy.
"Are you looking for me?" he shouted.
Lucy waved a hand for him to come up. Then he approached. He was a tall, lean young man, stoop-shouldered and bow-legged from much riding, with sallow, freckled face, a thin fuzz of beard, weak mouth and chin, and eyes remarkable for their small size and piercing quality in different color, for one was gray and the other was hazel. There was no scar on his face, but the slight irregularity of his features reminded one who knew that he had once been kicked in the face by a horse. Creech came up hurriedly, in an eager, wild way that made Lucy suddenly pity him. He did not seem to remember that the stallion had an antipathy for him, but Lucy, if she had forgotten, would have been reminded by Sarchedon's action. "Look out, Joel!" she called, and she gave the black's head a jerk. Sarchedon went up with a snort and came down pounding the sand. Quick as an Indian, Lucy was out of the saddle.
"Lend me your quirt," said Joel, showing his teeth like a wolf.
"No, I wouldn't let you hit Sarch. You beat him once and he's never forgotten," replied Lucy. The eye of the horse and the man met and clashed, and there was a hostile tension in their attitudes. Then Lucy dropped the bridle and drew Joel to a huge drift log, half buried in the sand. Here she sat down, but Joel remained standing. His gaze was now all the stranger for its wistfulness. Lucy was quick to catch the subtle difference in him, but she could not tell wherein it lay.
"What did you want?" asked Joel.
"I've heard a lot of things, Joel," replied Lucy, trying to think of just what she wanted to say.
"Reckon you have,"
said Joel dejectedly, and then he sat down on the log and dug holes in the sand with his bare feet. Lucy had never seen him look so tired before, and it seemed that some of the healthy brown of his cheeks had thinned out. Then Lucy told him, guardedly, a few of the rumors she had heard.
"All that you say is nothing to what's happened," he replied bitterly. "Them riders mocked the life and soul out of me."
"But, Joel, you shouldn't be so touchy," said Lucy earnestly. "After all, the joke was on you. Why didn't you take it like a man?"
"But they knew you stole my clothes," he protested.
"Suppose they did. That wasn't much to care about. If you hadn't taken it so hard, they'd have let up on you."
"Maybe I might have stood that, but they taunted me with being loony about you."
Joel spoke huskily. There was no doubt that he had been deeply hurt. Lucy saw tears in his eyes, and her first impulse was to put a hand on his and tell him how sorry she was, but she desisted. She did not feel at her ease with Joel. "What did you and Van fight about?" she asked presently. Joel hung his head.
"I reckon I ain't gonna tell you."
"You're ashamed of it?" Joel's silence answered her. "You said something about me?" Lucy could not resist her curiosity, back of which was a little heat. "It must have been bad, else Van wouldn't have struck you."
"He hit me. He knocked me flat," passionately said Joel.
"And you drew a gun on him?"
"I did, and like a fool I didn't wait till I got up. Then he kicked me. Bostle's Ford will never be big enough for me and Van now."
"Don't talk foolish. You won't fight with Van." "Joel, maybe you deserved what you got. You say some rude things."
"I only say I'd pay you back," burst out Joel.
"How?"
"I swore I'd lay for you and steal your clothes, so you'd have to run home naked."
There was something lacking in Joel, but it was not sincerity. His hurt had rankled deep, and his voice trembled with indignation. But Joel, I don't go swimming in spring holes, protested Lucy, divided between amusement and annoyance.
I mean it anyhow, said Joel doggedly.
Are you absolutely honest? Is that all you said to provoke Van?
It's all, Lucy, I swear.
She believed him, and saw the unfortunate circumstance more than ever her fault. I'm sorry, Joel. I'm much to blame. I shouldn't have lost my temper and played that trick with your clothes. Oh, if only you'd had the sense enough to stay out till after dark. But no use crying over spilt milk. Now, if you'll do your share, I'll do mine. I'll tell the boys I was to blame. I'll persuade them to let you alone. I'll go to Muncie and—
No, you won't go crying small for me, blurted out Joel.
Lucy was surprised to see pride in him. Joel, I'll not make it appear—
You'll not say one word about me to anyone, he went on, with the blood beginning to darken his face, and now he faced her. How strange the blaze in his differently colored eyes. Lucy Bostel, there's been that done and said to me which I'll never forgive. I'm no good in Bostel's Ford. Maybe I never was much, but I could get a job when I wanted it and credit when I needed it. Now I can't get nothing. I'm no good. I'm no good, and it's your fault.
Oh, Joel, what can I do?
Cried Lucy. I reckon there's only one way you can square me, he replied, suddenly growing pale. But his eyes were like flint. He certainly looked to be in possession of all his wits.
How?
Queried Lucy sharply. You can marry me. That'll show that gang. And it'll square me. Then I'll go back to work and I'll stick. That's all, Lucy Bostel.
Manifestly he was laboring under strong suppressed agitation. That moment was the last of real strength and dignity ever shown by Joel Creech. But Joel, I can't marry you, even if I am to blame for your ruin, said Lucy simply.
Why?
Because I don't love you.
I reckon that don't make any difference if you don't love someone else.
Lucy gazed blankly at him. He began to shake and his eyes grew wild. She rose from the log.
Do you love anybody else? He asked passionately.
None of your business, retorted Lucy. Then, at a strange darkening of his face, an aspect unfamiliar to her, she grew suddenly frightened.
It's Van, he said thickly.
Joel, you're a fool.
That only infuriated him. So they all say, and they got my old man believing it too. Maybe I am, but I'm a-going to kill Van.
No, Joel, what are you saying? I don't love Van. I don't care any more for him than for any other rider, or you.
That's a lie, Lucy Bostel.
How dare you say I lie? Demanded Lucy. I've a mind to turn my back on you. I'm trying to make up for my blunder, and you insult me.
You talk sweet, but talk isn't enough. You made me a no good. Will you marry me?
I will not. Aunt Lucy, with her blood up, could not keep contempt out of voice and look, and she did not care. That was the first time she had ever shown anything approaching ridicule for Joel. The effect was remarkable. Like a lash upon a raw wound it made him writhe, but more significant to Lucy was the sudden convulsive working of his features and the wildness of his eyes. Then she turned her back, not from contempt, but to hurry away from him. He leapt after her and grasped her with rude hands. "Let me go!" cried Lucy, standing perfectly motionless. The hard clutch of his fingers roused a fierce, hot anger. Joel did not heed her command. He was forcing her back. He talked incoherently. One glimpse of his face added terror to Lucy's fury. "Joel, you're out of your head!" she cried, and she began to wrench and writhe out of his grasp. Then ensued a short, sharp struggle. Joel could not hold Lucy, but he tore her blouse to shreds. It seemed to Lucy that he did that savagely. She broke free from him, and he lunged at her again. With all her strength she lashed his face with the heavy leather quirt. That staggered him. He almost fell. Lucy bounded to Sarchedon. In a flash she was up in the saddle. Joel was running after her. Blood on his face, blood on his hands. He was not the Joel Creech she knew. "Stop!" cried Lucy, fiercely. "I'll run you down!" The big black plunged at the touch of a spur and came down quivering, ready to bolt. Creech swerved to one side. His face was lividly white except where the bloody welts crossed it. His jaw seemed to hang loosely, making speech difficult. "Just for that," he panted hoarsely, "I'll lay for you, and I'll strip you, and I'll tie you on a horse, and I'll drive you naked through Bostel's Ford." Lucy saw the utter futility of her good intentions. Something had snapped in Joel Creech's mind, and in that moment her kindness had given precedence to a fury she did not know was in her. For the second time she touched a spur to Sarchedon. He leapt out, flashed past Creech, and thundered up the road. It was all Lucy could do to break his gait at the first steep rise.